That if religion is just a fairy story for those afraid of the dark, then atheism is just a fairy story for those afraid of the light. The psychological critiques of religion are nothing new. Way back in the 19th century, it was Ludwig Feuerbach and Sigmund Freud who, in co-opting an ancient argument from Xenophanes, they claimed that religion stems not from humanity being created in God's image, but from God or the gods being created in our image. That human beings project our psychological needs for comfort and security upwards into the heavens, inventing a religious story to suit or a sky daddy to watch over us. Trickling all the way down to our cultural moment, the psychological critique of Christianity has taken on various flavours, from Nietzsche to Marx to Dawkins, but they all share in common these two basic ideas. First, that religious faith is a psychological crutch for the weak, and second, that belief in God is akin to belief in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy, nothing more than a delusion. So what does a Christian story have to say about religious faith? Is belief in God delusional? Well, for starters, the danger in the psychological critique of Christianity is that, like a double-edged sword, it cuts both ways. This reality was brought home on the pages of The Guardian, where the famed physicist Stephen Hawking quipped that religion, it's just a fairy story for those afraid of the dark. Now, rhetoric like this, it earns points amongst the deconverted, but his psychological critique of Christianity was answered with a witty clapback from Professor John Lennox. That if religion is just a fairy story for those afraid of the dark, then atheism is just a fairy story for those afraid of the light. You see, if you try and dismiss religion as nothing more than a delusion, simply because there might be psychological motivations for some people believing in God, then atheism too can be easily dismissed, because it isn't hard to find irreligious people who reject belief in God simply on psychological grounds. Even intelligent philosophers like Aldous Huxley and Thomas Nagel, they candidly admit to such, revealing in print that their skepticism was primarily driven by psychological motivations, that they don't want there to be a God. So beware of the sword of psychological critique, but rather than advancing the conversation by engaging the best arguments for another view, it tends to undercut healthy dialogue by reducing all true claims to mere psychology. A second flaw in the psychological critique of Christianity is that it commits a textbook case of the genetic fallacy, illegitimately concluding that belief in God is false simply on account of how that belief arose. You might have heard Richard Dawkins critique religion this way, that if you were born in India, you'd be a Hindu, or if you were born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim, or if you were born in the US of A, you would be a Christian. Now, Dawkins conveniently skips over how his own atheism may itself be the product of secular geography and influences, but the Achilles heel in this line of argument is that he dismisses all religious truth claims simply because people come to believe them through social environment or psychological desire. Let's say I believe in God because I lost someone dear to me, and I have a deep psychological need for comfort concerning the possibility of an afterlife. Now, that may not be a rationally justified reason to believe in God, but how I came to that belief actually says little to nothing about the truth of said belief. Because God may still be real, offering a smorgasbord of evidence to justify his own existence, even if my own reasons for believing him have nothing to do with that evidence. Moreover, just because I want something to be true, it doesn't make it false. In fact, in some cases, C.S. Lewis argues that deep and innate desires in human nature actually point towards the reality of the thing desired. Our thirst certainly points towards the existence of water, much the same way our hunger points towards the reality of food. So what then do we say of the deep religious impulse observed across all human cultures spanning time and geography? After all, if the Christian story is true, and we were made for a relationship with God, then it makes perfect sense that our hearts would have this innate desire for something spiritual and eternal that cannot be satisfied by this world, a longing that serves as a sort of soft evidence to guide us back to God. At the core, Dawkins is way off base calling belief in God a delusion for one simple reason, that the Christian story invites belief on the basis of evidence. See, the DSM-5, the Standard Diagnostic Bible for Psychological Conditions, it defines delusion as false beliefs based on incorrect inferences about external reality that persist despite evidence to the contrary. So how exactly does belief in God fit into this diagnosis? Well, in short, about as well as the Tooth Fairy fits into a science textbook. Because Christian thinkers put forward roughly 24 or so arguments for God's existence, the bulk of which are based off publicly available evidence. First, Psalm 19:1 and Romans 1:20 make the claim that God's existence can be perceived through studying nature, inviting science and philosophy to speak to the beauty and complexity of our universe. The observations from these disciplines serve as the foundation for various cosmological and teleological arguments for God's existence. Furthermore, Genesis 1:26 claims that humanity bears God's image, such that we serve as evidence of God's existence. Our deep experience as human beings furnishing the grounds for arguments from consciousness, rationality, morality, desire, free will, and love. Finally, the New Testament centers around the invisible God becoming visible as he writes himself into our story in the incarnation of Jesus, leaving this divine footprint in history that we can investigate in the sources, with the evidence for Jesus' life, death, and resurrection furnishing arguments from God's existence from fulfilled prophecy and miracles and the beauty of his character. Belief in God is not a delusion because Christian faith is not blind. Rather, with eyes wide open to the evidence all around us, Christian faith is a rational response to God making himself known. And even where there are hard things to understand, like the problem of evil or divine hiddenness, potentially contrary evidence, the Christian story is packed with raw stories of people doubting and questioning their way through these realities. You aren't expected to naively persist despite them, but invited to honestly scrutinize the Christian story to see if it has the resources to make sense of these objections. Truth invites questioning. So let me say one final thing. The good news in all of this is that Christianity doesn't offer a delusional crutch, but a real one. At different times, in different ways, we all need something real to lean on. So for those who are hungry for a purpose, to those who are desperate for hope, to those who are heavy burdened with anxiety, to those who are searching for truth, for those who are crushed by guilt, and for those who long to become who they were created to be, the Christian story invites you to take a fresh look at Jesus, heaven's answer to our every heart cry.
Dan here from Questioning Christianity. Thanks so much for checking us out. We are all about helping you connect the Christian story to life's deepest questions. So if you're enjoying the content, make sure you subscribe and click the bell on YouTube, and then go ahead and follow us on socials.